Hi, it's Dr. Crone again. Welcome to our video lecture on state formation. Remember from our previous video lecture, we learned what a state is and what its functions and characteristics are. So in this video, we're going to look at why and how the people decide to allow states to form. That's right. The people who are being governed have to somehow allow for state formation. Why do we, as citizens, if we value our individual freedom and autonomy, allow a government to tell us what to do? That's what this video is about. There are three theories of how and why states form, and we're going to get to them in a minute. But these theories all focus on the justifications that governments give to their people for needing a government. Remember, a modern state has a bureaucracy, taxation, varieties of social control like policing. All of those things take away freedom from individual citizens. So why do we allow it? Why do we want it? Remember, we also looked last video at the benefits that a state provides, like protection, social order, and infrastructure. Those are clues for us as to why states form. The three theories that scholars use to explain state formation are conflict, economy, and culture. So we're going to look at each of these in turn. The conflict theory of state formation tells us that the state forms basically from a need to either defend itself militarily or to try to pursue expansion through aggression. Think of World War I, where Germany was trying to expand its borders. So basically, the conflict theory, which is also known as the bellicist theory, bella or belle, is a root of a word that means war. So the bellicist theory says that the reason people are willing to give up their freedom is because of threats from the outside, from the desire to have more territory or to reclaim old territory, the desire to form military alliances with other states, and or to put down rival power groups within the borders. And so war and the threat of war is a great justification that the state can use to justify itself, to say, look, we're always going to have to defend ourselves against the evil country next door. Therefore, we need a permanent military. Often the military is the very first type of bureaucracy that gets developed in a state, and that really helps support this conflict theory. And of course, a permanent military means that the state needs money to fund it, so that justifies taxation. Social control can be very much related to conflict. Think of the draft. Drafting people to be in the army is the ultimate form of social control, right? You have to give up your, potentially give up your life and give up your freedom in order to serve in the military. So the conflict theory can be pretty robust, but there are also other theories that say there are different reasons that states form. So the economic theory is another pretty strong theory. And here the idea is that a state forms because of the need to coordinate economic activity and also to regulate it. So if you think about what life might be like if the economy was not regulated, you might have competing currencies, for example, where nobody agreed on a dollar and how much its value was. You might have a lot of criminal activity, stealing things from other people in order to sell things. Think of a completely unregulated black market economy like the drug economy. Think of how much drug sales and drug production cause violence in the society. Basically, if you think about a state forming in order to promote economic activity for the economic health of the people and also for their economic safety. So states might have to answer questions like who is allowed to make and sell goods and services? Who gets the ability to make them and to sell them, and who does not? How will workers and consumers be protected? In other words, how do we avoid slavery? How do we make sure that workers are paid a fair rate or are working in safe conditions? How do we stop monopolies from happening, for example, if that's something that wants to be happen? And then trade is very important for coordination as well. How is trade going to happen within the borders of the state? Are we going to allow trade from one city to another? How are we going to coordinate that to make sure that, violence and disorder don't erupt from competing cities trying to sell different things? And how will trade happen with other states as well? So the need for that kind of coordination as economies grow beyond just sort of a general agricultural economy, the economic theory at least says that that type of development and the need for answers to those kind of questions are going to justify the need for a bureaucracy. Think of a treasury. Think of the US Treasury that essentially manipulates the market for US dollars to but all of that depends upon the global trust that the dollar is sound and that there's a huge American bureaucracy dedicated to making sure that the dollar as a currency is a sound currency. All of those kind of things justify the need for bureaucracy. Most states have a ton of bureaucracy related to economic activity. Social control, so if you're going to allow the state to decide, for example, what businesses get to be incorporated or who gets to sell something in a certain area, then you're going to have to submit to various rules and regulations, which is a form of social control. And obviously, once again, you're going to need taxation to pay for those services, to pay for the regulators and the people who work in the bureaucracy in order to make the economy function smoothly. So that's the economic theory, and it's a bit of a competing theory with the bellicist, the conflict theory. Okay, and then another theory, this is kind of the third major theory, is what's called the cultural theory. And here the idea is that states arise basically because of the identity of people who are similar to each other. So people who share a sense that they belong to each other. We call this nationalism. We're actually going to look at that in our next unit. Nationalism or national identity. It can be related to race and ethnicity, but not always. But the cultural theory says that that's a natural way that people interact with each other, is to form sort of groups of us and them. And when you have your group of us, you know that you have to compete with others, with the them. And the cultural theory says that the state arises in order to protect us, the national identity, against threats to it, which might often come from external circumstances, could even come from internal circumstances. And that this sort of justifies our desire, our want for there to be a state that governs us. We want to govern ourselves. We want people like us need to be together, and we need to be competing with people who are not like us. And that's a way of justifying bureaucracy, taxation, and social control. Another element of the cultural theory is that often there is a religion that within the state or within this group of homogeneous people, they often practice a religion together. And religions, especially modern religions, often emphasize the kind of qualities that are needed to submit to a government. So the idea of communal living, often religions promote this idea of the good of a larger group than just the individual. They have morals and values against things like stealing or murder or things like that. And that's already sort of a way of controlling one's individual desires and freedom, desire for freedom. I mean, ultimately, freedom, if taken to an extreme, would be I can do anything I want. I can murder someone, I can steal someone's things, and I should be allowed to do that because I want to be free. And obviously, to have an organized culture or an organized state, you can't have that. You have to have social order and social control. And when you have a religion saying these things are bad, you shouldn't do them anyway, it's better to submit to a power greater than yourself, then the argument goes that this then allows for people to be more accepting of the social control of a government. I use the example of Calvinism, which was a form of Protestantism right around the time that the modern states were developing in Europe. And many scholars, including there's the detailed stuff about it in your textbook, said that that particular version of Christianity, it was like a sect of Christianity, its tenets, its things that people believed in, were sort of a perfect way of justifying state control. It created people who were really good citizens of a state. So you can read more about that in your textbook. But that's the cultural theory. And again, it's somewhat competitive with the conflict theory and the economic theory. Political scientists, there are some who believe in one theory over another, but that's not necessarily what I need for you to be doing right now. I need you to be weighing these things. Okay, let's move on to a little bit of a different theory that's kind of not as dominant as the original three. So a final theory that some people have talked about is what's called the diffusion theory of state formation. And basically, we could think of this as the copycat theory. The idea here is that the reason states arise somewhere is because they exist somewhere else. And the idea is that the people living in a certain area say, wow, that big group of people with a military and a nice system of roads, etc., over there in that geographical area, they're doing way better than us. They have more wealth. They have more success. They have greater territory that they've been able to conquer. We want that too. And so that justifies the need for a bureaucracy, because the state arises and says, hey, don't you want to be like all these other modern states? And that may sound like a silly theory or sort of a, junior high-ish theory of how states are formed. But really, when you think about it, the forms of bureaucracy all over the world that have developed are very, very similar to each other. Even the way that states build their buildings, a building for a government just about anywhere often looks like buildings for governments everywhere else. And this sort of can be used as some support for this diffusion theory that, look, there is a copycat element to the creation of states and the way that they sort of all form around the same time in this one particular period of history. So that's something to think about. To wrap up our work, what I'd like you to do is, keeping all this information in mind, think about the case study you read about in the textbook about German state formation. And what I'd like you to do is, just as you're reading through that case study, think about the theories of state formation that we talked about in this video. And you could post to the discussion board about this. Look at evidence that you see from the case study that relates to the theories. Maybe you're going to see something in the German state formation case study and you say, well, gosh, that seems to support the idea of the conflict theory or the economic theory or the cultural theory. So talk about that in your discussion board, or you could talk about, do you think that state formation is cut and dried? Some political scientists seem to. There's some that say, you can't have state formation without conflict. The desire for war or defense is what causes all state formation. Do you think it's that cut and dried? Do you think that you can choose. Can you choose? Do you think you could choose one theory that explains states' existences, or is it more complex than that? There's no right or wrong answer to these questions. I would love you to kind of get started with that discussion on the discussion board. So feel free to add that to your discussion board. All right, that's the end of the video for this unit. If you've already watched the first one and completed the readings, then you're definitely ready to post to this discussion board and take the unit quiz. Good luck with all of that. And remember, I'm here for you. If you've got any questions, you can drop into office hours, you can email me, text me, give me a call. Happy to answer any questions. Thanks. Have a great week.